Greetings to baristas. It's been a while, and with all this going on out there, I'm rather drawn out of my cave to again make my face into a spitting image for your edification and enjoyment, specifically about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. First, let me offer the obligatory disclaimer. I do not endorse the targeting of any civilians, nor the home invasion of anyone's sovereign space, be they European, Arab, or Indo-Chinese, just as the American targeting of North Vietnamese civilians by bomblets designed only to maim and kill in the most painful ways possible. Lobbing artillery at apartment buildings is a war crime. Right up there also with the terror bombing of Dresden and Tokyo, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There's also no doubt that Putin's preemptive strategy was a strategic mistake, at the very least. Delegitimizing his quite reasonable concern at pre-war NATO expansion, and that his army shells are falling mostly on the mixed East Ukrainian population, which had until last month the strongest ties to Russia. The outright xenophobes of West Ukraine, whom he has the strongest beef with, remained unscathed by his wrath. So let there be no doubt where I stand when it comes to the flatulent winds of war blowing forth from whatever direction from those who cheer it on. But along with that issues a more solid crapola which is going unchallenged because A, no one with knowledge is in a position to do so, and B, those in charge of propaganda often really don't know differently. One such floating piece is that the Ukraine, and there's nothing wrong with the use of the definite article by the way, as in the Lebanon, the Netherlands, the Argentine, the Dominican Republic, the State of Israel, is sending the highest number of refugees since World War II. This shows the Eurocentric bias of the Western media, as of course the greatest number of refugees since 1945 came from partitioned India, with some 10.5 million, 20.5 if you want to add repartitioned Pakistan. But even in Europe it's not true. To date there are 3.5 million Ukrainians displaced from their country, a terrible number, yet the post-World War II record is still held by the ethnic Germans driven or fleeing from Eastern Europe, some 5.5 million. Proportionally speaking, the greatest outflow came from Palestine in 1947. At the beginning of that year, there were 1,324,000 non-Jews resident in its territory. A year later, there were 156,000. Not nearly the total figure for modern Ukraine, but the equivalent would be 85% of Ukrainians fleeing their homeland into surrounding European or global space. No wonder Palestinians call it the catastrophe. Rest assured, there will be World War III before things are allowed to go that far in Ukraine. Another unchallenged trope is that Ukraine since 2014 had become a flourishing democracy. Only by the book, in the same way that Brazil or Argentina or Venezuela are democratic, or Chicago for that matter. What that really means is that our guys are in charge. When they're not, as in Venezuela, they cease to be democratic, elections are not. President Zelensky's Ukrainian government banned small opposition parties considered too leftist or pro-Russian for Ukrainian political space, but not the right-wing parties building statues to World War II nationalists who are themselves considered notorious war criminals and Nazi collaborators outside the country. Those stressing Zelensky's Jewish roots, his family name being Slavicized from green, and the victimization of his grandparents in the Holocaust need to remember that he is first a veteran actor/entertainer who knows how to put a camera to good use. Vladimir Putin has given him a script and a soundstage, and he knows how to play his role. Above all, he's a highly skilled politician who knows that hanging on to power is worth a mass in Kiev, meaning a nod to xenophobic and chauvinist ultranationalists is the price paid to win free elections in modern Ukraine. One egregious example, recorded frequently in the post-Maidan years, was the public humiliation of local gypsies, aka Roma, by painting them and tying them to utility poles, often in groups. This is not ethnocide, but it's indicative of the hateful mentality passing as patriotism in so much of modern Europe, and going unquestioned by those who drool about preserving Western values. Or maybe they are preserving them. On the sanctions issue, underneath the West's moral vapors, the smell of the oil and gas industry is all over the room. Washington has had its fingers on this trigger for years, which is why it fired off its sanctions missiles so quickly. If it's not directly responsible for the current flow of war, it's definitely part of the background. Why? Because Europe's dependency on Russia's oil and gas complex has grown exponentially since the 1990s. rivaling U.S., UK, Saudi production and markets. Criminalizing trade with Russia cuts off a regional and global rival and opens Europe to American and allied producers. Already, oil and gas companies are drooling at the prospect of uncapping production and filling European gas tanks, warming its cities, and refueling its industry. Not to mention another excuse for gouging you at the pump, like a shy's experienced Semite. Ukraine is a prize for both sides precisely because of the Russian-based oil and gas pipelines traversing its territory. The oil industry's fingerprints were all over the Iraq War, and there's a greasy smear residue over this one, too. Even the Chechen War was, at bottom, over oil production, not Islamic terrorism. You will never glean a drop of this from the Western media, as it's leaks moral effusion like a Gulf oil slick. Well, anyway, I do hear that Canuck upon the phone. See? Who? Big Brother? I do not have one, sir. Oh, you. What brings you so directly on my wire-free device? You wish to take issue with my analysis to remind me that Oceania has always been at war with Eurasia, that there was never peace offered or refused. You mean NATO and Russia, but I seem to recall other voices saying, what's that? Forget about it? Yours is the only voice that matters now? The thought police are watching my telescreen as I speak, and so what?